That's a good question. I mean, to go back to what Dr. P said a few minutes ago, the trackers, in terms of normal behavior, it's really, really interesting. I sort of look back at the last 2 years, and it really have outside of the core updates, you haven't really seen this much volatility in a short amount of time like this. Usually you see like 2, 3 days of volatility, maybe a couple of days later, another 1, 2 days, sort of maybe a reversal of that. But here you're looking, I think it's like, out of the last 16 days, from March, let's say 15th through the April 3rd, you're talking like 16 days of volatility that hasn't happened in the last 2 years. Haven't gone back past that. So it is really interesting. And what Dr. P said, that is true. It's really top level. You don't really know what that means until you sort of try to dive into it. We're just sort of like finding a needle in a haystack, like on steroids. Um, what I did see, though, to sort of speak to what Olga was bringing up, is that the COVID-19 keywords, whether it be something like COVID-19 cure or anything like COVID-19 athletics, really anything related to COVID, there's a very, very clear pattern, which is really interesting. And it sort of seems as if Google made a very, very specific change in how it relates to COVID on not when the tracker started seeing the updates, but on March 11th, which is interesting because that's when I think the World Health Organization labeled it a pandemic, if I'm not mistaken. And it seems like Google pushed a button on that day. And all of a sudden, it was if news sites had never ranked before for the keyword started ranking, which is bizarre in itself because usually you'll see during an update, you'll have sites that, gain a few positions, lose a few positions, but not sites that were not ranking at all before for the keyword, all of a sudden appear on the SERP. So it looks like Google pushed a button for COVID. And what I think is happening is that it's almost like a news result because it's a developing story that Google hasn't really seen before, and it keeps spreading into all sorts of directions and twists and turns. And news results, like Olga said, are very, very volatile in general. And it's a hard thing for Google to sort of figure out, how do we qualify this? How do we deal with this? And because Google's so good at making connections, it impacts so many different things. Like, for example, I was looking at keywords about desanitization or disinfection, whatever it is. All of a sudden, there's a shift, and Google went bonkers, throwing sites in and out, up and down, because all of a sudden, what was a normal disinfection is now a COVID disinfection, and Google doesn't know how to handle it yet. So COVID sort of reaches into all these other areas, and I think what happens is something like a chain reaction. There's so many different areas that COVID touches, and Google's so good at making connections that Google sort of had to say, wait a second, how do we understand this and how do we understand that? And now, how does it relate? How does it work for other areas that are connected? So I'm going to sort of put it like this. Let's take a keyword like, I don't know, tourist attractions in New York City. So one of the results that Google was playing around with was a result from the New York Times about staying at home and what to do and how to have fun while staying at home. And Google didn't really have to do with that result. It sort of threw it in there, took it off the SERP, took it back off the SERP, put it back on the SERP. And at the same time, all the other regular normal sites that rank for that keyword, top 50 things to do in New York City, also fluctuated up and down, back and forth, and did a whole bunch of reversals. And Google sort of said, well, if this keyword is being impacted by COVID, what about other keywords that relate to this keyword? And what about other keywords that relate to those keywords and other keywords that relate to those keywords? And Google's sort of trying to figure out, like, how far is this COVID thing reach? And how accurate are we based upon what's going on?
This might be a lead into Marie, but I'm curious, the last few months we've had all these updates around health and YMYL, and now we have this major health crisis. So it's like Google has been tweaking everything around your money or your life and these health kind of things. And now this crisis comes along, and I wonder if this crisis is triggering all that work they've done over the last 6 months with core updates to a degree maybe that they didn't even anticipate.
So it's Google's fault we have this update, this pandemic.
Probably not.
I'm not taking the causality quite that direction, but it's almost like they set the stage for reworking the algorithm around these problems, and then it's being tested. Like this is their live test.
Yeah, that's Marie, that's your expertise. So what do you think?
Well, and I think Dr. Pete's exactly thinking the same lines that I am. That probably 2018, mid 2018 was when, that's when we first saw the Medic update, and we saw, Google's been interested in showing us good, trustworthy sites for quite some time. But at that time, they really seemed to take an interest in health. And the goal was to make it so that people don't find untrustworthy information. So I believe, Barry, you've covered this, that some people asked John Mueller, is Google manually going in and saying, well, we're going to change this search result because it's unsafe. If somebody says, does this random treatment work for coronavirus? Google doesn't want people to be finding these out there wacky conspiracy theory sites, right? And so this is, I think, what we're seeing now is Google's done a fairly good job. If you remember, there was an article that was put out last year by Google, a white paper on how they fight disinformation. And they talk about the fact that, especially in health queries, they want to surface sites that are known as authorities. And we see that, if you do searches for anything that's important and related to coronavirus right now, you're going to see recognizable authority health sites, that are ranking well, and that's great. I think in terms of what is the algorithm doing, what we tend to do is we look at every week, is there a particular date where our list of clients is seeing some change? And we saw March 10th or 11th, we started saying, oh, there's an algorithm update. And I believe, and then we look at the tools. So we look at all of these people's tools, and they were kind of like, well, some of them are up, some of them are not. And then, like Mordy said, March 11th was when we started talking about this, actually, I think, was that when the World Health Organization called it a pandemic?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
And it was around that time that the NBA shut down and that Donald Trump made the ban on travel from Europe. And so what we thought initially was a Google update turned out that the whole world had changed their search patterns. And that's the trick there, is in trying to figure out for your search traffic, is it really, are we seeing changes because something Google did, which I think is less likely right now? And if you are seeing changes, it's either related to changes in search traffic patterns by the world, or Google adapting to that. And I don't think they've written, a specific algorithm for here's what we do because of coronavirus. They're adapting to how the world changes their searches. And that's what I think the trick for us now is in trying to interpret what's happening.